She was sold as unwanted, mocked, and abandoned by everyone who should have cared. No one saw her strength until the widowed rancher stepped in. Clara Mayfield's scars told a story of pain, survival, and hidden resilience. Ethan Cole had to decide, walk away or stand for what was right. Discover the shocking truth behind her sale and the redemption that followed. Watch now to see how love and courage can change everything. Red Hollow woke to dust and noise the way it always did on auction days. Wagons lined the street, horses stamped and snorted, and men gathered with coins in their pockets and hunger in their eyes. Clara Mayfield stood at the edge of the pen with her hands folded tight, her shoulders bent as if she could fold herself smaller. The sign tied to the post said "Unwanted." People read it aloud as if it were a joke. Some laughed, others spat in the dirt. Clara did not look up. She had learned that looking only invited more harm. The auctioneer called her forward like a sack of grain. Clara stepped onto the rough boards and felt the crowd close around her. Words hit harder than hands. Broken, useless, trouble. She kept her eyes on the ground and let her mind go still. This was easier than hoping. Her dress hung loose on her frame and old bruises marked her wrists where sleeves could not hide them. When someone raised a voice, she flinched before she could stop herself. The men noticed. They smiled in a way that made her stomach turn. Ethan Cole watched from the back, his hat low, his jaw set. He had not come to buy a person. He had come to sell a calf and leave. Since his wife died, Red Hollow felt loud and sharp to him. He preferred his ranch and the quiet miles beyond it. When the auctioneer lifted a hand toward Clara Mayfield, Ethan felt a pull he did not want. He saw the way she stood like she was bracing for a blow. He saw the marks on her hands. He heard the crowd grow cruel. The bids came low and mean. Men joked about getting work cheap. Someone said she was not worth the rope to lead her away. Clara felt each word settle on her skin like dust that would never wash off. She told herself to stay empty. She told herself it would be over soon. When the auctioneer called for the final bid, a man stepped forward with a grin that made Clara stiffen. His voice was loud. The crowd leaned in. Ethan Cole moved without thinking. He lifted his hand and spoke a number that cut the noise. The crowd turned. Some scoffed, some stared. The auctioneer blinked and struck the board, sold. The word landed heavy. Clara closed her eyes. It did not matter who held the rope, she told herself. It never did. Ethan stepped closer and took the paper. He did not look at Clara at first. He did not want to frighten her more. When he did look, he kept his face calm. Up close, he saw more, faded scars along her forearm. The way her fingers trembled when someone laughed too loud. The way she stood ready to obey. Something tight pulled in his chest. They walked through Red Hollow together. People watched. Some muttered that Ethan Cole was a fool. Others shrugged. Clara followed half a step behind as she had been taught. The street felt long. Every sound made her flinch. Ethan noticed. He slowed. He spoke once low and steady, telling her they would leave town soon. His voice did not rise. It did not press. Clara heard that and nothing else. At the edge of town, Ethan stopped by the water trough. He filled a cup and held it out. Clara hesitated. Her throat burned, but habit held her back. Ethan waited. He set the cup down where she could take it without touching him. She drank in small, careful sips. Ethan looked away to give her space. He felt anger then, sharp and clean. No one should move like this from kindness. They reached the hitching post where his horse waited. Ethan lifted his pack. Clara stood still. He told her she could sit in the wagon. He did not order. She obeyed anyway. As the wheels rolled, Red Hollow fell behind them. Dust rose and settled. Ethan watched the road. His thoughts turned dark. He had paid to stop a moment of cruelty, but he knew payment did not end it. The marks on Clara Mayfield told a longer story. Someone had taught her fear with care. Someone had sold her to bury that truth. Ethan felt a weight settle. He did not know what came next. He only knew that the wrong he had seen would not be left in Red Hollow without answer. The road to the ranch stretched wide and quiet. The horse kept a steady pace. Clara watched the land slide past and tried to read the man who now owned her. Ethan Cole kept his eyes forward. He spoke once more, telling her the name of the place, telling her there would be work and food. His words were plain. Clara nodded. She did not ask questions. Questions had never helped. As the sun lowered, they reached a bend where the grass opened and the fences ran straight. The ranch came into view, simple and worn, like a place that asked for effort and gave shelter in return. Ethan reined in and climbed down. He tied the horse and stepped back. He told Clara she could get down when she was ready. He did not reach for her. The space he gave felt strange. She climbed down on her own and stood with her hands folded. Ethan showed her the pump and the small room by the kitchen where she could sleep. He pointed to a blanket. He said there would be supper soon. Clara listened and stored the facts away. She did not trust the quiet yet. Quiet had always come before the next order. She kept her face blank. Inside, she felt nothing. That had kept her alive. When Ethan turned away to tend the horse, Clara studied her hands. The skin was rough, the nails broken. She remembered the auction sign and the laughter. The word unwanted echoed and then faded. She did not cry. Tears were wasted where she had been. She stood and waited. Ethan finished his chores and set a pot on the stove. He moved with care as if sudden motion might break something. He felt the day settle into him. He had not planned this. He had only known he could not walk away. As he cut bread, he thought of Red Hollow and the men who joked. He thought of the marks on Clara Mayfield. He knew enough to know there was more to learn. They ate in the same room, quiet and separate. Ethan set a plate near her and stepped back. Clara ate slowly. The food grounded her. She kept her eyes down. When a board creaked, she stiffened. Ethan noticed and kept still. He did not ask for thanks. He did not speak of the auction again. After supper, Ethan showed her the yard and the path to the barn. He told her where tools were kept and where water ran. He said they would start early. Clara nodded. Work was clear. Work was safe. Night came soft. Ethan left a lamp burning low. He told Clara he would be in the other room. He closed the door without locking it. Clara lay on the blanket and stared at the ceiling. The day replayed without sound. She felt the old numbness hold. It was heavy, but it kept her breathing. Outside, Ethan stood on the porch and watched the dark settle over his land. He felt the wrong of the auction like a bruise. He did not know the full truth yet, but he knew Clara Mayfield had been sold to hide it. The thought set his jaw. He decided then that whatever had been buried would not stay that way on his land. He went inside and put out the lamp, leaving the house quiet and steady. Morning came with pale light and birds. Clara woke before the sound. She sat up and listened. Nothing shouted. Nothing struck. She folded the blanket as she had been taught and stepped outside. The air was cool and clean. For a moment she felt the edge of something like relief and pushed it away. Ethan rose soon after. He nodded to her and set coffee to boil. He spoke of the day and the fences that needed mending. His voice stayed level. Clara answered when needed and worked when shown. The hours passed without insult. By noon, the sun warmed her back and her body moved on habit alone. Ethan watched and learned. He saw strength where Red Hollow had named waste. He saw care in the way she handled tools. He felt the weight of the choice he had made and accepted it. This place would not sell her again. Not today. Not ever. The ranch held steady, and both Clara Mayfield and Ethan Cole faced the work ahead with quiet resolve, grounded by daylight and simple truth. The morning sun stretched across Ethan Cole's ranch outside Red Hollow, casting long, pale shadows over the fences and fields. Clara Mayfield moved with quiet precision, her hands stiff from yesterday's labor but her mind alert. The chores were simple in description but brutal in execution, stacking hay, carrying water, mending fences, but they left no room for doubt about her place. She expected no kindness. She had learned long ago that expecting anything could be dangerous. Obedience, she told herself, was survival. Ethan Cole watched from the porch, hands resting on the railing. His eyes were steady, noting each movement without a word. He had seen many hands work the land, but Clara Mayfield's discipline stood apart. There was no hesitation, no complaints, only a careful, measured energy that came from necessity. He could sense the quiet endurance beneath the fear. Every glance she gave the barn or the tools carried a caution that spoke louder than any words. He wondered what had forced her to carry such a weight on her own shoulders for so long. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of hay and earth. Clara lifted a bale of hay and carried it across the yard, her back straight despite the strain in her arms. Sweat beaded along her temple and she forced herself to keep a steady pace. Each step was a reminder of the chores she had survived before, back when her worth had been judged as nothing. She did not complain. Complaints drew attention, and attention drew cruelty. She had learned to shield herself from both. Ethan Cole walked toward the barn, keeping his distance. He stopped just inside the doorway and watched her. Clara Mayfield moved through the space like a shadow that belonged to the land itself, folding hay into neat stacks, gathering water with careful hands, cleaning tools until they shone faintly in the morning light. He noticed the way she flinched at sudden noises, how her eyes darted toward the door whenever someone entered the yard. Fear had become her companion but not her master. She carried it with quiet mastery, a skill honed over years of hardship. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed higher, warming the earth and casting long shafts of light across the barn floor. Clara paused for a moment to wipe the sweat from her brow, taking a slow breath. She looked out at the rolling fields that surrounded Ethan Cole's ranch. Here, there was no auction crowd, no mockery from men who saw her as less than human. The land was open, and yet the feeling of being unwanted lingered in her chest like a shadow. She adjusted the straps on her sleeves, readying herself to continue. Each movement was careful, practiced, and precise. She had learned that precision protected her. Ethan Cole approached cautiously, carrying a bucket of water. He did not hand it to her but placed it where she could reach it. Clara's hands shook slightly as she picked it up, her grip tight but steady. She did not speak, did not offer thanks, because words had never changed anything. Ethan observed, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked to him and then back to the task. She had been trained by fear, and yet she persisted. There was strength there, hidden beneath the caution, and it was undeniable. The work continued through the morning. Clara Mayfield swept the barn floor, her movements methodical, as if every gesture had been rehearsed to avoid mistakes. She stacked firewood in the corner, each log carefully balanced. She filled troughs for the animals, refilling water again and again, never resting until she had completed the task. Ethan Cole remained nearby, occasionally offering instruction but never hovering. He gave her space, allowing her to move freely while keeping a watchful eye. He noticed the subtle signs of her past, small tics, fleeting glances, the way she avoided sudden noises, and realized that the fear was not ignorance but memory. Lunch was quiet. Ethan prepared a simple meal and placed it on the table outside the barn. Clara Mayfield sat on the edge of the bench, her hands folded in her lap. She ate slowly, aware of each movement, each bite. The taste of bread and stew was unfamiliar but grounding. Ethan sat opposite her, eating in silence, respecting the boundaries that had been established long before either of them had arrived on the ranch. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was necessary. It allowed her to measure the world and her place within it. After the meal, the afternoon chores began. Clara Mayfield worked the fields, hoeing the soil and tending to the small garden that supplied the ranch. Her arms ached, her hands blistered, but she continued without complaint. Each task was performed with care, each motion deliberate. Ethan Cole watched from the porch, considering what he had done by purchasing her. The auction, the ridicule, the cruelty of Red Hollow, it weighed on him. Had he done the right thing? Or had he simply bought a burden to satisfy his own conscience? He could not answer yet, but watching Clara Mayfield endure the work with steadfast resolve made the answer lean toward yes. The animals needed attention next. Clara Mayfield fed the horses, checking hooves and brushing coats until they shone. She moved methodically, her focus absolute. Ethan Cole joined her at the barn, assisting silently, handing her tools, adjusting gates, and ensuring the animals were cared for. The tasks were menial but necessary, and through them, Clara began to understand that here, labor was not punishment, it was purpose. The distinction was subtle but significant. By late afternoon, sweat drenched her clothing and her body was heavy with fatigue. Clara paused at the edge of the pasture, taking in the vast expanse of land that stretched beyond the ranch. There was a beauty here that Red Hollow had never offered. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth, and the horizon opened wide with sunlight. She allowed herself a small inhale, a quiet acknowledgement that survival could coexist with peace. Ethan Cole approached, setting down a bucket and nodding toward the tools. He did not speak of her past, did not question her endurance. He simply provided what she needed and stepped back. Evening came with long shadows and a golden hue that fell across the ranch. Clara Mayfield worked to finish the remaining tasks, feeding the chickens, repairing fences, and stacking the last of the hay. Her muscles ached, and yet she moved with determination. She had learned that effort was the currency of survival, and she spent it willingly. Ethan Cole observed, noting the subtle shift in her demeanor. Nor, fear still lingered, but there was a new layer, guarded endurance. She trusted cautiously, allowed herself small gestures of autonomy, and carried herself with a quiet strength that he had not expected to see so quickly. Dinner was modest and prepared with care. Clara Mayfield ate slowly, tasting the food, acknowledging the effort without speaking. Ethan Cole sat across from her, his eyes thoughtful. He had begun to question the morality of the auction, the decisions of the town, and his own part in perpetuating harm, even unintentionally. He realized that purchasing Clara Mayfield had not ended her suffering. It had merely moved it into new surroundings, and it was his responsibility to ensure that here, she would not be treated as unwanted. Night fell over the ranch. The air cooled, carrying the scent of hay and animals settling for rest. Clara Mayfield prepared her small room by the barn, laying the blanket neatly, arranging her few belongings with care. She paused by the window, looking out at the stars that dotted the wide sky. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a quiet thought of possibility. A day might come when fear did not dictate every action. Ethan Cole moved quietly in the main house, aware of her presence but giving her the space she required. The ranch settled into stillness. Clara Mayfield lay on her blanket, muscles sore but spirit intact. She thought of Red Hollow, of the auction, of the cruelty that had defined her for so long. Yet here, in the expanse of Ethan Cole's land, there was a different rhythm, one that allowed endurance to become strength. Her breathing slowed. Her mind rested, if only for a moment, in the knowledge that she had survived another day and that the work itself carried meaning beyond mere survival. Ethan Cole remained awake longer, walking the perimeter of the ranch, checking gates and animals, thinking of Clara Mayfield and the journey that had brought her to his land. He considered the choices of the town, the cruelty of others, and the unforeseen responsibility he now held. He resolved to watch over her with care, to see her as more than a purchase, and to allow her the space to heal in her own way and time. The night was quiet, steady, and full of unspoken understanding. By morning, Clara Mayfield was ready to rise before the sun. She folded her blanket neatly, carried water to the barn, and began the daily labor with the same measured endurance. The fear that had guided her steps for years still lingered, but it was tempered by the knowledge that she was not alone. Ethan Cole watched from a distance, aware of her inner struggle and impressed by her quiet determination. Together, they faced another day on the ranch, the land stretching wide and open, offering a harsh but honest life that demanded effort and gave purpose in return. Hours passed, each chore completed with precision. Clara Mayfield learned the rhythm of the ranch and the limits of her own strength. Ethan Cole saw not just labor but resilience. He noted the subtle ways she adapted to the work, how she measured risk and exertion, and how her careful attention kept the animals and property safe. The lessons of survival that had been forced upon her in Red Hollow were still present, but here, they were paired with respect and recognition rather than mockery. By midday, sweat and exertion had left Clara Mayfield physically tired but mentally alert. She paused to rest against a fence post, taking in the wide fields that rolled under the sun. For the first time, she allowed herself a thought unaccompanied by fear. Perhaps endurance could become strength, and perhaps a life built from labor and care could be more than mere survival. Ethan Cole approached silently, handing her a clean cloth for her brow. Their eyes met, and in that brief exchange, acknowledgement passed between them. No words were needed. The afternoon light softened as tasks wound down. Clara Mayfield completed the final chores, feeling the familiar ache in her muscles and the satisfaction of work done. Ethan Cole checked the fences and animals one last time before retreating to the porch to observe. The ranch was quiet now, save for the occasional sound of a distant animal or the wind rustling through the grass. There was no auction, no jeering crowd, no insult. Only work, earth, and the presence of another human being who had chosen to see her for what she could endure, not for what she had been labeled. As evening fell, the colors of the sunset painted the ranch in muted gold and shadow. Clara Mayfield prepared for rest, arranging her blanket and belongings with care. She paused at the doorway, looking out over the fields, and allowed herself a small, private moment of acknowledgement. She had survived, and she had done so without surrendering entirely. Ethan Cole watched from inside, aware of her glance and recognizing the significance of her quiet triumph. The day had been harsh, but it had also been fair. The ranch TT led into night. Clara Mayfield lay on her blanket, reflecting on the endurance of the day, the rhythm of labor, and the subtle but growing recognition that fear need not dictate every action. Ethan Cole moved through his own tasks quietly, respecting her space while remaining aware of her presence. Together, in separate but parallel efforts, they began the slow process of building a life that allowed endurance to evolve into strength, and labor to become a form of dignity that neither Red Hollow nor its cruelty could take away. By the time the moon rose fully into the sky, casting silver light over the fields and fences, Clara Mayfield was asleep, muscles sore but spirit unbroken. Ethan Cole stood outside for a final moment, looking over the land, thinking of the day, and silently resolving to uphold the promise inherent in his choice, that Clara Mayfield would never again be treated as unwanted, for here on this ranch, she was seen, valued, and given the chance to rebuild herself in her own way. The dawn came slow over Ethan Cole's ranch outside Red Hollow, stretching light across the fences and fields, painting the barn with gold and shadow. Clara Mayfield moved carefully among the animals, her hands steady despite the lingering aches from days of hard work. She had grown accustomed to labor, the kind that tested body and patience, yet each task brought her closer to a rhythm she had not known in Red Hollow. Even with the early sun warming her back, a knot of worry sat low in her stomach. Whispers from town had reached the ranch. Names, half-truths, rumors carried by wind, and passing travelers made their way to Ethan Cole's land. Clara knew what they said before they even reached his ears. Ethan Cole approached the barn silently, noting the shift in her posture. Her shoulders were tight, her hands slightly trembling as she adjusted the feed trough. He had learned to read Clara Mayfield in ways others never could. Every hesitation, every flicker of the eye told him more than words ever could. She expected rejection, the kind that had defined her life for years. The auction, the cruelty, the whispers, they had left scars deeper than skin. Ethan had thought the work and space of the ranch would be enough to calm her, but some wounds ran deeper than routine or care. The morning air carried the scent of earth and hay, and for a moment the ranch seemed untouched by the gossip of Red Hollow. Clara Mayfield moved among the horses, checking hooves and brushing coats, every motion careful, deliberate. She had prepared herself for the news that she would be unwanted again, for the rejection that might follow once the truth was revealed. She had been taught to expect this, to anticipate abandonment, and in that anticipation, she felt a numb edge to her fear. Ethan Cole watched, silent and steady, feeling the weight of what he had learned. The whispers told a story that no one else had dared to speak aloud. Clara Mayfield had been sold not because of failure or weakness, but because someone else's crime needed erasing. The town had decided she was expendable to protect their own. He approached her as she worked, careful not to startle her. "The men from town," he said softly, "they talk." Clara flinched just slightly but did not stop her motion. She did not look at him. "I know," she whispered almost to herself. Her voice was low, quiet, carrying years of disbelief and endurance. Ethan Cole nodded, understanding the full weight of her experience. She had been forced into invisibility, made to carry shame that was not hers, and he had purchased her as if that would end the harm. Now he saw it was only a beginning. The sun climbed higher and Clara Mayfield continued her work. Every movement was measured, every gesture controlled. Ethan Cole observed, noting how she flinched at sudden sounds, the way her gaze darted toward the barn door as if expecting someone to step out with mockery or demand. She had been trained by fear, but not broken. Her discipline, her quiet endurance, spoke of a resilience that came from surviving unthinkable cruelty. He understood now the moral weight of what had happened, the cost of buying a person who had already been defined as worthless. He had to decide what that meant for him. Clara Mayfield paused mid-task, leaning against the fence and wiping her brow. Her mind raced with all she had heard from Red Hollow, the words whispered by strangers, the half-truths, the accusations. She had expected to be discarded, expected the town to reclaim her as property once her usefulness had been defined. Shame threatened to creep back in, to wrap around her like a suffocating blanket, but she resisted. She straightened, adjusted her sleeves, and resumed her work. The fear lingered, but it was now tempered by something else, a fragile sense of dignity she had not allowed herself before. She was not powerless, even if the world insisted she was. Ethan Cole moved beside her, offering small assistance. Without intrusion, he handed her a tool or adjusted a gate, always silent, always careful to respect her space. He had been thinking all morning about what it meant to own a person, to purchase someone with money, and yet hold a moral responsibility that no amount of currency could cover. Clara Mayfield's presence demanded more than labor. It demanded awareness, protection, and recognition of her humanity. He realized the ranch was not just a place for work. It had become a space where right and wrong collided, where he could either perpetuate harm or create something stronger and safer. By noon, the heat had grown and sweat drenched their clothing. Clara Mayfield paused to drink water, her movements deliberate. Ethan Cole stood nearby, watching the way she drank with small, careful sips. Her body was taut, ready, as if expecting danger to rise at any moment, yet there was a steadying rhythm to her actions. He could see the strength beneath the fear, the capacity for endurance that had been honed by years of abuse. This strength was not born of comfort. It was forged by necessity. And now here, on his land, it could be nurtured rather than exploited. As the day wore on, Ethan Cole thought more about Red Hollow, the men and women who had participated in the cruelty, and the systems that allowed such injustice to flourish. He realized that purchasing Clara Mayfield had not simply removed her from harm. It had given him the responsibility to protect her, to acknowledge her worth, and to stand against the injustice that had placed her in danger in the first place. The choice was his to make. He could allow the whispers and rumors to dictate her fate, or he could confront them, ensuring that here on this ranch, she would not be diminished. Clara Mayfield continued her tasks, feeding the animals, repairing fences, and tending to the small garden. Her movements were precise, careful, a reflection of her past training and present necessity. Yet there was a subtle shift in her demeanor, almost imperceptible. Fear was no longer the only guide. A quiet determination had begun to emerge. She still expected hardship, but she also allowed herself the notion that she might endure without shame. Ethan Cole noticed, and it strengthened his resolve. The afternoon sun softened as clouds drifted across the sky, casting moving shadows across the yard. Clara Mayfield paused to inspect the fences, her hands on the rough wood, fingers tracing the grains and knots. She thought of Red Hollow and the events that had led her here. Her shame had been imposed by others, but now, on Ethan Cole's land, she had the power to reclaim dignity, even if only in small measures. She measured each motion, each decision, aware that survival required vigilance, but also that resilience demanded recognition of one's own value. Ethan Cole moved quietly to the barn, checking supplies and tools. He considered the moral weight of the day and of the choices he had made. Clara Mayfield was not property. She was a person, and her past did not diminish her present or future. The knowledge of why she had been sold, the crime of another man, the protection of powerful interests in Red Hollow, was a burden he now shared. He could not undo the past, but he could shape what came next. The decision was his responsibility, not just as a landowner or a man of means, but as someone who had witnessed cruelty and chosen to act. As evening approached, the ranch settled into a rhythm of quiet tasks. Clara Mayfield finished the day's work, stacking the last hay, securing the animals, and tidying the tools. Her body ached, but the work had a grounding effect. She breathed deeply, the air thick with the scent of hay and earth, allowing herself a moment to acknowledge the endurance that had carried her through yet another day. Ethan Cole stood nearby, watching, ensuring that the space remained safe and steady. Dinner was prepared simply, with careful attention. Clara Mayfield ate slowly, tasting the food, noticing its warmth, and letting herself exist without judgment for the first time in days. Ethan Cole joined her, silent but present. The quiet was not oppressive. It was respectful, an acknowledgement of boundaries and of the new reality that had begun to take shape. The whispers of Red Hollow could not touch them here, not yet, and perhaps not ever. After the meal, Clara Mayfield prepared her small room, arranging her blanket and belongings. She paused at the window, looking out over the darkened fields. The night carried the scent of pine and the promise of wind over open land. She allowed herself a single thought: she was still here, she had survived. Her dignity, fragile as it was, remained intact. Ethan Cole moved quietly through his own tasks, aware of her presence and of the significance of the day. He had learned that ownership meant more than payment. It meant responsibility, vigilance, and recognition of worth that no town could define. The ranch settled fully in. Night. Clara Mayfield lay on her blanket, muscles sore, mind alert, yet at peace in a way that had eluded her in Red Hollow. Ethan Cole stood on the porch, looking over the land, feeling the weight and promise of his choice. He understood now that the future of Clara Mayfield depended not on her past, not on the judgments of Red Hollow, but on his willingness to act with moral clarity, to protect what he had purchased not just with money, but with intent and conscience. By the time the moon rose fully, casting silver light over the ranch, the land was quiet except for the low breathing of animals and the occasional rustle of wind through the fences. Clara Mayfield slept, her body exhausted but her spirit intact. Ethan Cole remained for a moment longer, gazing at the horizon, knowing that he had chosen the harder path, the right path. Here, in the quiet and work of the ranch outside Red Hollow, the wrongs of the past would not define her again. He would see to that. The dawn that followed promised labor, care, and a new rhythm. Clara Mayfield would rise, continue her work, and endure as she always had. But now she would do so under the watchful eye of someone who understood her value, who had chosen responsibility over convenience, and who would not allow Red Hollow to reclaim her. In this, both Clara Mayfield and Ethan Cole found a measure of peace, hard-won, deliberate, and morally unshakable. Clara Mayfield survived what no one else would, and Ethan Cole proved that courage and compassion can change a life. Her journey from shame to dignity reminds us that love is more than a feeling. It is protection, respect, and standing for what is right. If this story moved you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to see it. Comment below, which moment in Clara's story touched you the most? Subscribe now for more unforgettable tales of love, redemption, and the wild heart of the West.